So my name is Parul Mittal. I'm a cybersecurity consultant for currently the Department of Defense.
Why cybersecurity?
It's funny when I was in undergrad or even trying to choose my career, cybersecurity was not something that came to mind. I kind of fell into it and I'm extremely grateful for it now, but I started off in more of a device forensics space, which I also just happened to fall into, and that kind of ended up being my gateway into cybersecurity. So that's kind of how I ended up in the industry, and super thankful for it. It's a hot field to be in, and I feel like there's always things changing and stuff, so you're always like at the forefront of like tech changes and whatnot.
I definitely agree. It is a hot field to be in. When I moved to Bay Area, I did not know, and Bay Area itself is like a very InfoSec focused, and I see lots of companies in InfoSec I did not know of, and yeah, this field is very hot for careers changes or whatever. So yeah, that I completely agree with. So within cybersecurity, which field you are specializing in?
Yeah, so it's when I first started in cybersecurity, I kind of ended up being more of like a policy thing, right? So like all things cyber from A to Z, whether it's like ports and protocols or like what does front desk security look like, right? Like you need to be able to check off all the boxes when it comes to security in spaces that are at least for the US government, for example, right? Everything's kind of like a little bit larger scale. When I joined SecurityCompass, actually, was my first time kind of focusing into like a niche field in cyber, which was really cool because it was application security, right? And I was like, I think it'd be interesting to become, career goal related, a subject matter expert in one particular area of cybersecurity, right? Like you get the broad spectrum and then you're like, okay, how do I dive deeper into the specific topics? So I did application security, loved it. I think I gained so much from it. Obviously, like I came back to the US government space, which ended up still being more of that big picture. Like, how are we looking at it? Aerial view style, right? But a lot of it right now, in at least my current role, it's like and more engineering related. So it's more like kind of looking at the systems, looking at the architecture diagrams, and figuring out what needs to change where based on policy changes, requirements changing, things like that. It's like live systems that you have to make sure are constantly upkept, right? So I guess that's a roundabout answer to your question about what specifically in cybersecurity. But given where I'm at and where I've been in my career so far, it's really been a let's take a big picture view of it, right? So it's kind of hard for me to answer that question, but nonetheless, I hope that like that kind of captures like where I'm at and like what I see in like my day-to-day job.
It's interesting to see that because when I talk to people, they say, hey, I started from this particular section. So maybe I started as a developer, system admin, network admin, or something of that sort. And then, or say like test engineer. And then they slowly moved into security and they focus on a particular field. Uh, this is interesting to know. So, what is the story? How did you start hearing about InfoSec? And when did you feel like, hey, that this is something I can spend my time on? Or what made you think like, hey, policies, this looks interesting? Because most people find policies boring.
Oh, incredibly, right? It's so boring. But so what happened? I guess I'll start in college, right? So when I did my undergrad program, it was forensic science. So it was very biology and chemistry heavy. So nothing to do with information technology whatsoever. That was pretty much unrelated to what I studied for 4 years. So then I graduated, and funny enough, I'm like, wait, I actually don't want to do a master's program. I don't want to do a PhD program. I just realized it quite late, and I was like, you know what? Like, I'm gonna go and take my degree in a completely different field and go try something completely different, as many students after college tend to do. Not the right thing to do always, but here we are. So I ended up in a role that was forensic science. Like I was a forensic scientist right out of college. It was for a small company out here in DC, and I wore a lot of different hats. Right, it was a small company, so you're doing a lot of things. Anything from, like you said, IT support, network administration, like general admin stuff, to take this hard drive apart and put it back together. Right, so all those things ended up giving me a good exposure to like IT, right? I felt like I learned like some of the nitty gritty stuff, something that wouldn't even necessarily carry over into cybersecurity, but I got the exposure, which was great. And when I went to leave, I ended up going to Booz Allen Hamilton, and I wanted to get hired for something, general IT related, right? Like I would have been fine doing like, something administrative, like IT admin related, to kind of get my foot in the door. I felt like I was still at that point in my career. But I got really lucky. They were like, hey, actually, with some of the device forensic stuff that you did, like encrypting a hard drive, de-encrypting it, and things like that, why don't you join our cybersecurity team? We could use a policy and compliance analyst. And I was like, sounds fantastic. Let's do it, right? And I didn't think too much about what the policy and stuff was. But as you mentioned, right, policy and compliance is incredibly boring. You are checking boxes. It's like checking someone's homework, essentially. But if you can think of it as someone who's had no fundamental exposure to the field from like undergraduate studies, this is perfect, right? You're getting an A to Z breakdown of what cybersecurity is, NIST compliance, NIST 853, and how it fits into your government spaces, right? Like your client spaces. So it ended up for me being a really good way to get exposed to cybersecurity. And fine, once you get the hang of it, you're like, okay, so, I'm a year in, I'm a year and a half in, I've been doing these assessments and authorizations and, checking the boxes and stuff. I get it. Can we move on from here, right? So that's kind of like where I was able to take those skills, and I moved to Deloitte afterwards, and it was similar consulting, but it was less policy heavy, right? It was a little bit more like, let me do proper consulting 101 and say, here's all your systems. How are we going to up the security standards for this? And, well, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but these contracts are like 10 plus years usually. So it's a slow moving progress when you're trying to revamp cybersecurity across a government space, right? Or across any space, really. Even if it is commercial, it's going to take some time, right? But, with all the red tape that comes with, working in the public sector, it takes a little bit more time, right? So I don't know if that answered your question per se, but I wanted to explain the policy background and why it got me to where I was. I decided to do a master's that helped me get a little bit more fundamental knowledge. So I got to put policy and compliance in the backseat, hopefully forever, and kind of grow my career from there.
Sure. So when you say these things, some things are coming to mind. So when you said, "Hey," raising your hand for cybersecurity when somebody asked you to, I have seen that in you when even though I worked with you like a very shortly in SecurityCompass. I can't go into much details, but there was an occasion wherein which we all were sitting in a room. I was obviously on Zoom call since I was remote, and there were two teams, and there was a requirement for somebody to act as a bridge between these two teams, and there was like, hey, who will take that role? And you were like, hey, I will do that. And I've seen you doing that, like ready to volunteer, ready to take risk, and ready to be that bridge, those type of things. So it is interesting to see that. You also mentioned about carrying the skills over. So how did that help your forensic and policy knowledge? How did that help later in your career, or did that help at all?
So I think the policy, NIST 853, things like that, assessments and authorization was extremely helpful in taking at least some knowledge in different, categories, like what are some of the different families that are in NIST. I'm like entirely blanking right now, but authorization, password compliance, things like that, like session lockout times, right? Once you're in the cybersecurity industry, these are all like standard, right? You're like, oh, of course, I don't even think twice about it, right? Like something like session lockout should be 10 minutes, 15 minutes, depending on the level of sensitivity of that system, right? But you have some like tokens of knowledge in these different areas. And when you move into a different space, for example, when I went into the application security space with SecurityCompass, felt like I was coming in with zero expertise in anything AppSec related, right? So it was kind of overwhelming. I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm in over my head, right? But having those little tokens of something in every pocket really helps give you at least, again, a baseline to work off of, right? So it gives you something to work off of because you're like, okay, I have a broad spectrum. Help me build on the smaller spectrums from this level up, right? So I think it definitely helped me in giving me that big view. I think it's easy to go from a big view and narrow in, right? And it probably is pretty similar from a small view and bringing it back up too. But I think as the way I am as a person, the way I am as a learner, like I think like give me the big thing and then let's deep dive, right? So it kind of worked out that way in my career as well, where it was like a here's the whole picture and now let's deep dive into this one little bit, right? So it did help me like kind of look at things from that aerial perspective. And I think that's really important from a cybersecurity consultant standpoint, because it's great if you have the knowledge in that one thing, you're a SME in one thing, but it's even better, if you can put the whole picture together, right? I think that makes you an overall better professional, a better consultant, and you're just better equipped to give good advice, right?
I completely agree. It makes you a better consultant, better engineer, more effective, of course, because you are keeping that big picture in your mind when you are working on tiny steps. I love that idea. Now, since you made the switch to cybersecurity, you reached all these fields, but what if you didn't? Where will you end up?
I always thought, and I think this is still like potentially a post-retirement goal of mine, or we'll see, right? That's a little bit far away. But I would have really liked to get into like teaching. And it's kind of funny because I think there is a little bit of an overlap when you're a consultant as well. You're kind of like telling someone, here are the steps to get to where you want to be, that sort of a thing. So and don't ask me what subject I would have taught because I have literally no idea. But I thought it would have been cool to like, to teach students, right? And I think with where I'm at in my career now, the way I could still hopefully modify that and do something like that is, if my goal of like becoming some sort of a subject matter expert in something cybersecurity related does work out the way I want it to, I would love to teach, a college course or two on that, later on in my career where I'm kind of probably hopefully taking things a little easier when I'm next to a screen and more passing on my knowledge to students who are interested in the field, right?
Teaching is interesting. You get to inspire lots of people. You get to change the life of many people. I love that. I love that. Since you are into government, what all certifications you did for this particular field, or do you think they are really helpful?
So the only certification I was actually asked to do was the Security Plus certification. And I did my master's, right? But that wasn't really, let's not call that a certification. I also did a graduate certificate in cybersecurity technology. Again, not something that was asked for, something that was like, it's mostly like a contractual checking a box for how one contractor is bringing in this level of skill set, right? These particular certifications. But to answer your question, with regards to the Security Plus certification, pretty straightforward exam, a little bit preparation required. I know I had to do a full boot camp of a week to be able to kind of complete that. But I don't think, I'm going to be honest, I don't think it was useful for me on the day-to-day job. I think a full-fledged master's program was useful to me because, like I said, I'm a big believer in like, you should have a baseline and then you kind of build from there sort of a thing. I think that's been my theme this whole interview so far. But that was helpful. So I really liked being able to get that fundamental knowledge. Now, that being said, if there was a cybersecurity professional in the space who had done, yes, I majored in cybersecurity technology as an undergrad student. I don't know if I would recommend saying like you should definitely also do a master's program. You know what I mean? Like they've gotten that fundamental knowledge, and I think the most learning that you get is on the job, right? It's good to have like some of that technical skill set and knowledge that you've learned in like your classwork and whatnot, but to really be able to piece it together and for things to stick, I think is just a matter of doing it in your day-to-day work.
Yeah, sounds right. So who or what inspires you?
Who or what inspires me? So I think I'd have to say my dad. And so my dad is also in the technology industry. Like he started off as a developer and now he's like grown in his career. So he's more on the architecture side, and he's also a government contractor. So everyone in DC is either a government employee or they're a contractor. It's really one or the other, right? So I don't know, just like watching, and I'm sure, like you can really relate to this. A lot of people could probably relate to this. Like I'm first generation Indian, right? And my mother and father are the immigrants that brought us over, right? Or that started the life here. So like to have that discipline to keep pushing ahead in your career. He was always studying ahead. Like he was always working to like grow in his career and like get better, become a better professional. And on top of all that, still like, learning a new country that doesn't speak the same language as you right off the bat, and, all the different cultures, and like, raising a family and all those things, right? And like buying your first house, buying your first car, all those things are going on. And at the same time, you're so driven to kind of keep pushing and keep pushing. And I'm here very fortunate enough to not have a lot of those stresses in my life, right? Because that's something that immigrant parents, that's the bullet that they bite for the rest of their upcoming generations, right? Is that I'm doing this so you don't have to. So to have like those stresses off my plate, but having seen my, dad go through that and get to where he is in my career is really inspiring, right? Like, okay, it's like, it makes you think like, if he can do that with all those other things going on in life, I can definitely do it, right? So that's kind of inspiring to me for sure. And then I think the other thing I would just add, this is more of like a little bit more of a blanket statement, is like, women in STEM. I think that's just been really inspiring. And I know that's been a theme recently in like recent history and things like that too, which is just really cool to see. Like I think tech started off as more of a male dominated field, and like to see more women in it and like women inspiring women, it's been awesome. And like, makes you want to get ahead, makes you want to push ahead, makes you want to uplift other people too in the industry.
I completely agree. Technology field, I think, is finally helping us bridge those gaps, especially in the traditional trade-off jobs. There was a tendency to be sexist and say, hey, this is a job for men or this is a job for women, and STEM is actually helping bridge that divide, and I'm really happy seeing that. Now, what are your hobbies?
When I'm not spending my time doing cybersecurity, what am I doing, right? I guess we all had to pick up a lot of hobbies, especially with quarantine, right? So let me get my laundry list out really quick. So I've gotten really like into like cooking and baking. Like I used to always really like baking when I was younger and stuff. So I think just all this extra time that we've had these days has really allowed me to kind of like, explore different recipes. Now, I won't get ahead of myself and tell you I'm doing anything crazy, because trust me, I'm not. But I like the recipes that I like finding the ones that are like, there's a good amount of complexity to it, but not too much. I still want to keep it easy. I want to keep it digestible. No pun intended. So cooking is a big hobby of mine. I've always like danced throughout like my, school years and college. I was on a dance team for all 4 years. And then I coached young kids after college at the point where I was like, I am not equipped to continue dancing, but I can teach the kids, right? So I really enjoyed doing that and like coaching, taking kids to competitions and stuff. That was really fun for me. Obviously, you're probably seeing a theme here with how I do enjoy teaching kids, working with like our younger generation, right? To kind of pass on what you do know, right?
Before going to our final question of the day, thanks for coming and sharing all the interesting stories, all the inspiring stories with us. So final question, do you have any message for the audience?
Yeah, I would say my biggest message is, you put in the hard work, but don't feel disheartened or discouraged if things aren't going according to the plan that you felt like you had. Because sometimes you just need to let things the chips fall where they may. And sometimes you end up in an even better position than you had initially sought out to find, right? So it's like do your hard work and let everything else kind of fall into place as it will. You don't have to push boundaries or things that are feeling difficult, because there might be something better in store, right? And why write that off?